God of War has been one of my go-to cathartic action titles for over a decade now. Whenever I had a bad day at work, I'd come home and blow off some steam murdering Greek gods and monsters, laughing through the obnoxiously gratuitous sex minigames, and just reveling in the madness of it all. This all culminated with the release of God of War 3 on the PS3. I adored this game. As far as I was concerned, this was the pinnacle. And even today, as far as third-person action games like this go, I feel it's been equal a time or two, but never surpassed. Afterwards, you did have God of War Ascension, and it was perfectly fine, but really felt almost like just a long DLC expansion of God of War 3. Add to that the fact that Kratos' backstory had already been well mined by Ready at Dawn through their PSP games Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta, and it just didn't really seem like there was any reason for the game to exist, outside of giving the PS3 another exclusive to keep it going until the PS4 was ready for launch. So I moved on from God of War. Oh, I didn't forget about it, I just left its genre and gameplay as an itch that I wasn't going to scratch, because I felt I'd just end up getting disappointed. And then Sony Santa Monica dropped that first gameplay clip for the new God of War, and let me tell you something, I was pissed. Everything I saw in that new footage felt like a mistake. I dreaded playing this game, because I just had this sense that I would hate it, and it would forever taint the fond memories I had of playing the previous games in the series. So over the coming months, right up until its release in fact, people would ask me if I was excited for God of War, and I'd say no. I'd avoid more detailed questions and just say I was reserving my judgment until I'd actually had a chance to sit down and play it. And then April 20th, 2018 arrived, and I sat down to play this new God of War. And just as I feared, I really, really, really hated it. For about 90 minutes. Don't get me wrong, the graphics were amazing, and the music was equally so, though I missed the bombastic opening Kratos theme with the epic narration. I didn't like that there was no jump button. The combat felt really slow and sluggish. I felt like I was swinging the axe through molasses, almost like the guns in Killzone 2. I had no dodge roll. All I could do was strafe and sidestep, and I couldn't even run. It just felt slow, boring, and tedious. I didn't feel like I was controlling a god. I felt like I was controlling an old man whacking at kids with a cane who had wandered onto my lawn. But then, around 90 minutes later, the weirdest thing happened. The game suddenly started to get good. My attack speed increased dramatically. I was able to dodge roll. I was able to sprint. I still couldn't jump, but I'd unlocked special moves that included aerial maneuvers. It still wasn't aerial combo juggling, but it felt somehow right just the same. I won't get into story particulars here because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who, for whatever reason, still hasn't played the game. But suffice it to say, I really started to get sucked into it. And before I knew it, 90 minutes had turned into 7 straight hours, and I realized that the game, while still not scratching my third-person action game itch, had hooked me, because it was scratching another itch entirely. My action RPG itch. God of War is a semi-open world action RPG. Similar in structure to one of the 3D Zelda titles, or a game like Kingdoms of Amalur, but with a tight, over-the-shoulder view similar to Naughty Dog's hit The Last of Us. The title boasts a leveling and progression system that promotes advancement of your endurance and abilities, primarily through crafting weaponry and armor, and unlocking skills both for you and your son Atreus. Yes, I said son. Also like The Last of Us, you have a young cohort along for the ride. At some point after the events of God of War 3, Kratos found himself in Midgard, married, and with a son. The game picks up as Kratos' wife has passed away, her last wish that he and his son scatter her ashes from the highest peak in the land. The only problem is, Odin and his cronies have become aware of Kratos' presence and that of his son, and are hell-bent on killing them both. Now, especially over the last couple of generations, there's always the fear that having a kid sidekick is going to turn a game into an endless escort mission, the bane of all gamers. But that's just not the case here at all. Much like The Last of Us, Atreus mostly takes care of himself and actually aids you in combat. Yeah, every now and then an enemy will get a hold of him and you have a limited amount of time to get to him and break him free, but this really is mostly a rare occurrence. In fact, once you get Atreus leveled up a bit, his relation to you starts to feel a bit like the gameplay of Nier Automata, where you use your floating cohort to fire at an enemy and distract them so you can get in close for sword strikes. Rather than making the combat clunky and overly complicated, it complements it quite well, with Atreus going into action with just a press of the square button. Yes, there are some minor puzzles where Atreus has to climb up and knock down a crate or open a locked door so Kratos can progress, which will make seasoned God of War players roll their eyes a little bit, seeing as how previously Kratos could have easily just jumped up that high or lifted the door on his own power, but that's not really a fault of the game itself or its design. God of War is both a sequel and a reboot simultaneously, a feat by no means easy to pull off, so these kind of observations can easily be forgiven in light of just how right the game feels once it gets past that first 90 minutes. The graphics are the best there is on PS4 or PS4 Pro for that matter. It's hard to imagine anything else coming out for the system between now and the PS5's release that could outdo it. The animation, the environments, the lighting, everything is top shelf. The frame rate is steady, even better on the PS4 Pro if you're in performance mode. And of course, the designs are just breathtaking. Whoa! Became a common phrase uttered during my playtime, as over and over I happened across something just completely jaw-dropping and unexpected. The music is astounding. It's not as over-the-top, operatic, or bombastic as the music from the previous titles, but it's epic in its own right, adding gravitas when needed, but not wearing your ears out with constant orchestral bombardment like the previous titles. In some ways, it brought back memories of the Skyrim score, which for me is pretty high praise, as that's one of my favorite game scores of all time. The voice acting is equally good. In fact, astoundingly good. This probably has the best voice acting of any of the God of War titles. There was a lot of hesitation with gamers about the fact that they'd replaced the original voice actor for Kratos, but within 5 minutes of starting the game up, you don't even notice it. Yes, there is a large difference between how the two actors approach the role, but it just feels like Kratos, so just a little ways into the game, you don't even notice it anymore, you just accept it that it is Kratos. All the other performances are equally great. Some of it will have you rolling on the floor laughing. There's some really good humor in this game that goes along with it, and it's really brought along well by the fantastic voice acting. The controls are tight as can be, again, once you get past that first 90 minutes. Even when it speeds up, it still takes some getting used to as far as the axe goes. There's a definite weight to it, and like Thor's hammer, you can throw it at enemies and then call it back to you, the sound and vibration of the DualShock 4 lending a satisfying thunk when it returns to your hand. Different equipment that you can earn over time lends the axe different abilities, which in turn unlocks new attacks and skills. It's all very satisfying. However, it does take a little bit of time if you are a veteran God of War player to get used to using the shoulder buttons for attack as opposed to square and triangle, which I constantly was getting myself into trouble by accidentally going to square for a melee attack or what have you, instead of hitting the shoulder buttons. To coincide with that, it does at first feel a bit odd going from the older games that had multiple weapons that you could switch between to a 25-hour action RPG that only has one weapon. But, okay, I know I said no spoilers, but I just have to let this one go. 2/3 into the game, you get the frickin' Blades of Chaos back, and oh my god, they kick so much ass. Once you get those blades back, it takes a game that was already phenomenal and just piles more awesome on top of it, granting you new combos and options to vary up the gameplay even more. If there was any negative thing I could say about the game, and it's not even anything that I could deduct points for, it would be that for an RPG, the world doesn't quite feel as full as it should be. You meet a witch, you meet other gods, and you meet two little weird Smurf-looking elf brothers who crack hilarious one-liners and craft all your gear and give you fun side missions to go on. But where are the people? It's fine to see no mortals in a third-person action game, but this is an action RPG. You know, where's the towns? Where are the NPCs? You do spend a good bit of the game on Midgard after all, and you see the remains of wrecked Viking ships all over the place, and you find ghosts of dead Vikings all over the place, so why do you never see the Vikings themselves? I didn't really pay attention to it until I got to the end of the game and realized that the closest I came to seeing any mortal men were these ghosts here and there. Again, this boils down to a design choice that doesn't detract from the experience at all. It just kind of struck me odd after the fact. But again, it's not something that I'm going to deduct points for because it's not a flaw of the game. It's just a design choice. The core game is about 20 to 30 hours long, depending on your skill and what difficulty you're playing it at. Once you beat the main campaign, you return back to your cabin from whence you started, and you will then have a variety of additional fun activities to keep you coming back for more. Challenge trials, side missions, and of course, those glorious Valkyrie fights that feel like they were ripped straight out of Bloodborne. There's a lot of meat on this bone, folks. Sony Santa Monica definitely wanted to make sure that there was $60 worth of gameplay on the disc. God of War is not what I really wanted from a new God of War game, but I'm glad it's the game I've got. I'm thrilled that it's the game I got. It's possibly the most successful reboot of a franchise I have ever seen, while simultaneously holding on to the lore and characters of the previous titles, and yet it lends Kratos a depth and relatability he never had in the previous games. Don't get me wrong, he was cool, but it was hard to put yourself in his shoes because he was just revenge, 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 death and destruction all the time. He was a very one-note character, and that's simply not the case now. While I will say that I miss some of the other aspects, the aerial combat, and yes, even the gratuitous nudity, it was hilarious to see that in a game. What can I say? I can't and won't deduct points for that, or the other minor observations that I've mentioned earlier. Sony Santa Monica didn't give me what I asked for, but instead gave me a game that I didn't know I needed until I actually sat down and played it. God of War gets a 7 out of 7. So, how did you like this review? I know it's been a while. I hope the wait was worth it. If you did like it, then go ahead and favorite it and share it with your friends. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, and of course, if you do subscribe, make sure to hit that little bell button so you'll be notified about all my new content. Until next time, this is 7th.